Hello and welcome to the Paducah Human Rights Commission TV show. We're so proud, and it's called PHRC, Raising the Standard. And we have multiple segments for this 1 hour show, and we thank you for welcoming us into your viewing audience. And we are certain that you're going to appreciate our guests, our topics, and we're excited about why we're doing this particular show. At the Paducah Human Rights Commission, we are concerned about human rights and civil rights. And you can go to our website, just plug it in on your computer and go to Paducah Human Rights Commission, and you'll be able to find more about us than maybe you'll ever need to know. But certainly you will be well informed. We also want to encourage persons who are community and people-minded, who are interested in serving on this board, and the instructions on the steps required in order to bring that about is also on that website. Co-host today is Commissioner Page, and she is an associate instructor here at WKCTC, and she is also a licensed psychologist, and she and I are co-hosts together. She's going to be the lead person, and she is also the coordinator of an event for which this show is going to be aired in the month of May, and we're going to wrap that up and share some other details with you at the end of this great time with you together. Our guests today are Paducah Police Chief Brandon Barnhill and County Sheriff John Hayden. And now, if you would, Commissioner Page.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bell.
You're welcome.
We're so happy to be doing this show today, and we're so honored that we could pull the Chief of Police and the Sheriff away from their very important work to be on the show. And let me also say that they've been very good, very gracious and willing to come on. And I know they've done this show before, and something that I was telling Chief Barnhill before the show, if you ever do anything for Dr. Bell, you'll be asked again. And that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. Yes. So we're happy to have them, and we're just going to go ahead and start in with the questions. So with the first question that we wanted to ask, how are law enforcement personnel currently screened before it is determined that they're fit for service? And is there any measure in place to determine if they might harbor some prejudiced ideas?
Well, on the state level in Kentucky, Kentucky has a fairly stringent hiring process compared to other states. The Kentucky Law Enforcement Council, which is has the authority over police officer certification or peace officer certification in Kentucky, they have the responsibility and authority to establish certain guidelines that have to be followed is for hiring new police recruits. That doesn't mean that a department can't take it upon themselves to create additional things that an applicant would have to do or undergo to be hired, but these are the standard minimum requirements in Kentucky. You have to be a citizen of the United States. You have to be at least 21 years of age, a high school graduate, or successfully completed a general education development examination. You have to possess a valid driver's license. You have to be fingerprinted for a background check. You cannot be convicted of any felony. You cannot be prohibited by federal or state law from possessing a firearm. There is a requirement that the candidate has to be interviewed, has to undergo extensive background investigation. You have to take a polygraph examination. The applicant has to take a suitability screener, and that is a very in-depth examination of the applicant to see if the applicant is a good fit for this profession. Not everyone can be a police officer. You have to pass a drug screening test, discharged under honorable conditions if you've been in the armed services. You have to have a medical examination, a physical agility test, and not have been a peace officer in another state where your certification has been revoked. You also have to read the law enforcement officer's code of ethics, and you have to sign that code of ethics. And I'd like to read that briefly to you. As a peace officer, my fundamental duty is to serve mankind, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the and the peaceful against violence or disorder, and to respect the constitutional rights of all men to liberty, equality, and justice. I will keep my private life unsullied as an example to all, maintain courage, calm in the face of danger, scorn, or ridicule, develop self-restraint, and be constantly mindful of the welfare of others. Hones in thought and deed in both personal and official life. I will be exemplary in obeying the laws of the land and the regulations of my department. Whatever I see or hear of a confidential nature or that is confided in me in my official capacity will be kept secret unless revelation is necessary in the performance of my duty. I will never act officiously or permit personal feelings, prejudices, animosities, or friendships to influence my decision. With no compromise for crime and with the relentless prosecution of criminals, I will enforce the law courteously and appropriately without fear or favor, malice or ill will, never employing unnecessary force or violence, and never accepting gratuities. I recognize the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith, and I accept it as a public trust to be held so long as I am true to the ethics of the police service. I will constantly strive to achieve these objectives and ideals, dedicating myself before God to my chosen profession, law enforcement.
Well, I would say that anybody who has decided they want to go into law enforcement, and after they have read that, there ought not to be any misunderstanding, any confusion about the high character and integrity levels that are required to serve with law enforcement, whether it's county or city or some other level. And thank you for reading that. That didn't cross my mind to ask you to bring that, so thank you for being the professional that you are, because you knew it was required for people to be able to hear those words coming from you. Thank you. Chief Barnhill?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to that is, you know, the psychological screening also.
Yes.
That is a very important piece of this whole puzzle. We want to make sure that we dig into the individual and see who they are. The background investigation gives us a glimpse of that. The interviews that we can conduct with both command staff and the individual sheriff or myself, you know, that kind of really digs in, and we figure out who that individual is that we're fixing to hire. We obviously don't want to hire somebody that we know has any prejudice or bias or any psychological issues that are out there. The only thing after that I would add is that the state is very good about mandating training to keep us up to date on legal issues, which oftentimes are based on biases or prejudice or laws that you know, need to be adjusted. So in the state of Kentucky, we have the Department of Criminal Justice training that requires 888 hours, which is the second highest across the country. And in addition to that, we are the only state that requires 40 additional hours of in-service every year. So we are number one across the country in all 50 states, and we are very proud of that, and that speaks to the quality of officers that we have here locally.
Well, I wish we'd had confetti and some balloons with that, because I'm proud of it too. As a citizen of Paducah and McCracken County, I am so excited about all the good things that go on with both of you under your leadership, because you have standards that you have to bring up the department to. And then, but what you both do, is you exceed the minimum. You exceed what is standard. And I'm proud to say that we are in the studio with above standard leadership and above standard followership. So no matter what goes on or doesn't go on locally, nationally, internationally, we know what we have right here in Paducah, McCracken County. This is kind of, the word racist and prejudiced, they are always used sometimes to conjure up emotion, to conjure up drama, and then at other times by reasonable people, they are discussed because there needs to be discussion about both things. Do you think it's possible to be racist or prejudiced against any one group and be an objective law enforcement officer?
Yeah, I don't want to jump ahead and speak for the sheriff, but I think the answer to that is no. If we're aware of that and we know of that's happening, we're going to address that and deal with that. If we know it on the front end, we're not going to hire that individual. That we cannot allow that to filter into law enforcement and be a cloud of suspicion over that officer or over the department.
You've got to know your people. You've got to know the people that are working for your agency. You have to monitor them. They work under supervisors, and there are things that go on in people's lives, even their private lives, that can affect their emotional state. You just need to monitor your employees and know what's going on in their lives. I think that's very important. And if something comes up where or you have evidence that you have an officer that has a prejudice or some issue, that's something that generally will get worse over time if it's not addressed. So you have to address those situations.
Yes, and both of you have to be, and you know, and I bet you have to be this way with your students. Both of you have to be focused, well-informed, good observationists, and you have to have a good, solid, but balanced working relationship with the people who are between you and the other folks that are out there on the road and on the scene. And of course, I know that both of you do, but many of our persons in our viewing audience and people who will hear about this by word of mouth may not be as involved in the community and may not be as aware of the caliber of persons in each of your departments. And then if you're not, if somehow somebody slips under the radar and start doing things that cause hot spots in our community like racial profiling, what is your concept of it, near or far, and how do you handle it if you find out that it kind of got under the radar and now has been brought to your attention in some way or another?
How would you handle the situation in general?
What is your concept of it, first of all? Because there are so many. And then if it came to your attention some way or another, how would you handle it? What would be your procedure?
I think you have to look at each individual incident for one. Excuse me, you have to look at the individual officer. I think you have to look at the specific incident that you're talking about and dig into that and see what's going on and if there's any factual basis to that. If there is, then obviously you're going to go backwards from that. You want to see how pervasive this is with that individual, how long it's been going on, and is it widespread through the department. If it is, then that's a much drastic situation, and then it's just going to call for drastic measures to address that. If it's a one individual and it's one highlighted incident, then you want to correct that measure also, but that may be handled a little bit differently.
Okay. All right.
You can't put your head in the sand, and you have to stay involved as an administrator. You have to stay involved in what's going on. You have to stay in touch with the men and women that are out here working. These folks have a tough job. I don't know if a lot of people have really stopped to think about the daily life of a police officer, what all they see, what all they endure, and it's certainly a profession that I think in their eyes is a thankless job at times, certainly.
Yes, indeed. Mm-hmm. Yes. Commissioner Page?
I was just going to say that I'm glad that you mentioned that, how hard the job is. A lot of people don't put themselves in the shoes of the officer when he's walking up to make that, traffic stop that he makes several times a day. He has no idea what could go on, or when he gets the domestic violence call that you don't want to get. And that's another one of those really dangerous situations. And a lot of times you have to go into it fearing the worst, or at least prepared for the worst thing to happen. And so it's really easy for other people to sit back and say, after all the facts come out, well, this is what he should have done. It's easy for people to do that armchair quarterbacking.
That is very, very true. That is very true.
A person's background, their orientation, how they were raised, how they weren't raised, what some of their experiences were, what were the experiences of friends and relatives and coworkers and maybe schoolmates and maybe neighbors, have a lot to do with how people perceive people in uniform. And you're carrying that badge, you've got that gun, you're in that big old car, you have, you can arrest, you proceed to prosecution, you're perceived as having a great deal of power. And when people don't understand power, they tend to throw all of you into the same basket. It doesn't make any difference how good you are, how kind you are, how involved in the community you are, how much you share with citizens, even after you leave the post for the day, on your day off, if you have a day off. And so the orientation and the experiences of people have a lot to do with how they treat other private citizens and how they treat law enforcement. Commissioner Page, let's segue a little bit to what's going on in Ferguson and
Right.
a few things around in our country today.
Right. some people say that events like Ferguson, where it has been determined that the Department of Justice said that that what happened in that situation was racism and should not have happened. But some people say that those kinds of events are events where someone is shot or injured and then later they find out, well, the person wasn't armed. Some people say that that might be due to the militarization of our law enforcement, and we've seen that happen since 9/11. But would you say that that's true? Would you be reluctant to hire a person that maybe had a history of being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder?
Let me answer the tail end of that question first, if I would. I suspect that the vast majority of all law enforcement officers in the country, if they've been a police officer any amount of time at all, suffers from that PTSD to some degree. There's so much that you see. There's so many situations that you're involved in. It wouldn't be a normal situation for someone not to have PTSD to some degree. Certainly, if an individual officer is having some type of issue, serious issue that's affecting his ability to deal with the public, certainly those situations would have to be addressed. Go ahead, Chief.
Well, I'll jump onto the militarization point of your question. You have to look at the history of law enforcement. We are a paramilitary organization. We take a lot of training, tactics, equipment, excuse me, weaponry, those type things from the military. I think the distinguishing difference between the military and local law enforcement or civil law enforcement has to do with the operation style. The military trains on a go-get-em mentality, or we're on the aggressive. Local law enforcement is not that way necessarily. We deal with the circumstances and the information that's provided to us. A lot of times what you see, although it's specific to my police department, I have an MRAP, Mine Resistant Armored Personnel Carrier, which is one of the big bullet-resistant vehicles. I have said from day one, I had no way of purchasing that vehicle out of my budget. It was given to us by the military, but if it never leaves the job or never leaves the garage of where it's stored at the police department, it has served its purpose in Paducah. Mm-hmm. But I know, and most like everybody else realizes, that all it takes is that one incident. If that vehicle can provide safety to my personnel, his personnel, or the citizens, then it has served its role. I think you have to look at it from a defensive posture for local law enforcement. That vehicle that we have does not go out, and it's not aggressive, and it's not barging indoors, and it's not doing things overtly to bring attention to it. But whenever that need arises, and I hope it never comes, but when that need arises, and it will someday, we will have that vehicle, and we have other tactics, equipment, and those type things that have come from the military that are useful to us.
So you have to always be proactive, always, and you have to always try to think ahead. And thank goodness you guys are in leadership. I know you know how to do that. We're going to have to wrap up, darn it. But as quickly as we can, how would you explain to the citizens in how to behave when approached by officers, regardless of color or why they're being stopped or why they're being questioned, whatever the reason? What things would both of you say briefly as to how they should behave?
I appreciate your question and your comment, irregardless of color.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what we have to understand, and we have to push the same information out to young and old, black, white, purple, and green, so to speak. Mm-hmm. That information is be compliant. Listen to what the officer is asking you to do. If it's a traffic stop, then be compliant with your driver's license, proof of insurance, and your registration. If it's on the road, or excuse me, if it's on the street side, ask the officer why. You can ask questions. The roadside is not the place to argue the case. I mean, the court system is for that. But you can ask the officer simple questions. You can be compliant. You can listen to the officer and go from there. It's about compliance. Mm-hmm. It's not about, an officer trying to take rights away. We are there to protect your rights.
Excellent.
And there may be a reason that the person's being stopped that they may not even be aware of. Oftentimes, people will get very, very defensive just immediately, and perhaps the officers stopped you to tell you that your taillights aren't working. Mm-hmm. And be patient with the officer. Understand that he's doing his job. Everyone has a job that they have to do, and understand the position of the officer. The officer doesn't know you in many cases. He he doesn't know. So if he's acting a little cautious, it's just part of his job and part of his training. So listen and see why you were stopped, and try not to jump to any conclusions until you're able to have that conversation.
Listen, listen, and comply. Listen and comply. And develop good relationships with our law enforcement. That's real important because everybody's a part of the community. Commissioner Page, we're going to have to close this segment of the show. Thank you, Chief Barnhill. Thank you, Sheriff Hayden. We appreciate you so much, and I know that the citizens do as well, and I encourage them all to try to get to know the police department and the county sheriff's department as best as you can. And whenever there's an opportunity to volunteer, be sure to do that. And whenever there are opportunities out in the community where your children can attend, that you can attend so you can become more in tune with what goes on with our law enforcement, I encourage you to do so. And Commissioner Page and I are going to sign off on this segment, and we'll be back momentarily with our next guest. Thank you. Welcome back to the second segment of PHRC Raising the Standard, the television show for Paducah Human Rights Commission right here in the great Paducah, Kentucky, McCracken County. We are into the second segment, which involves our special guest from the NAACP and our faith community, our clergy. Our guests are Pastor Alfred Anderson, who is the president of the Community Clergy Fellowship and will be serving in this segment in that capacity, and Mr. J.W. Cleary, who is the president of the NAACP, Paducah and McCracken County, as a matter of fact, and we'd like to welcome you.
Welcome.
Thank
Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Both of you are busy, just as our guests for our first segment, so we don't take it lightly. We appreciate you being here.
Glad you asked.
All right. Commissioner Page, how do you want to start?
Well, I'm going to pose a question, and both of you can answer this. I'd like to know what you would like to say to our young African-American males today.
I guess the first thing I'd like to say is I would like for them to begin to love themselves, to love their families, to love God, and stop disrespecting themselves and learn to be obedient. You know, Grandmama had a saying that, you know, go to school and get you some learning, but also go by the church house and get you some burning. And I'd like to see our young people get back into the church.
Amen. Amen. I got to do an amen for that. President Cleary.
And I would just like to say that I just think education is the key. And we realize that everybody maybe not be fit for college or whatever, but whatever you do, do the very best that you can do. And don't wait till you're 4 or 5 years old to start. Start at a very young age, as early as 1 or 2 years old, because education, we're finding out, is the key to success in today's world.
And parents, I know that you're speaking to the hearts, the minds, and the spirit also of parents, and you're absolutely right. Parents have to be sure to begin the educational process when their children are very small. I tell you what, if children don't learn, if little ones, 1 and 2, 3, 4, if they don't learn anything else, they'll learn how to cuss. Yeah. And they'll learn how to throw things and how to have a fit and how to argue. And so it's very important to start early in teaching our children how to respect authority, to listen, to follow positive instructions, and for them to get educated, become educated, and then when they are old enough to branch out on their own, to continue that educational process. Thank you so much. And Pastor, faith is very important.
Very important.
Yeah. Believing in something better and bigger than ourselves is really important, because when all is said and done at the end of every day, it's really not about us.
You're so true, so true.
And back to what you were saying, I'm very passionate about education, working in the field of education. And research supports what you said, that you have to start young. Research has shown that kids that go to Head Start preschool are significantly less likely to drop out of school when they're, you know, juniors and seniors in high school. And yet, you know, that's one of the programs that we pull money out of, is programs like a federal Head Start. And, you know, in Kentucky, we're not doing real good in that area. Kentucky spends around $7,000 per pupil for education and around $19,000 per prison inmate.
Wow.
So it's like we're taking it away from education so we can put them in prison, and there's a link there.
As it relates to how people of color view law enforcement, what would you say to people about what they're doing or what they're perceived to be doing that contributes to how they react when they come in contact with law enforcement?
Well, I guess one of the things is that people must learn to respect those in authority, and also those in authority must learn to respect the other people.
Indeed.
And you know, and we must get to know one another. If I was a policeman in this community, I would want to spend some community time getting to know the people that I serve.
Yes.
I would just like to add that the fact that don't ever fool yourself. We do need the law enforcement.
Yes.
But, you know, like any group of people, you got bad in any group. But I would like to say that it's probably more good officers out there than it is bad officers. But even if they come into a situation whereas the officer got the upper hand on you, so therefore just go along with the program. That's my message to the young folks, is go along with it. And then if you think that something is not right, don't just raise Cain for a little while. Go down and go through the process of filing a complaint or talk to some of their leaders around them. You'll be surprised. Then eventually that particular person will finally weed itself out.
Do it the right way, like the peaceful protests. I was in Atlanta recently and I visited the Civil Rights Museum, and I was really struck by that was what they always talked about was, you know, we're gonna put on our Sunday best, and we're gonna go down there and we're gonna be professional, and we're gonna talk to people, we're gonna write letters, we're gonna do these things. It wasn't supposed to be violent. And so a lot of people from the African American community have spoken out about events like Ferguson and said, we don't want this. You know, this is just a few bad people and it's making everyone look bad. And I just drew the comparison between African Americans and law enforcement, that a few people make bad decisions and people will look at them and say it's all of them.
Yep.
Right.
And that's what happens to African Americans too.
Exactly.
I think that we must stop stereotyping each other. We must, as I said, we must get to know each other and stop the stereotyping and learn that all of us in life want pretty much the same thing out of life. A decent job, education for our children, a decent place to live, and want to go home at night and be able to sleep comfortably at night and not have to worry about it. But I think that I appreciate Ferguson for, in the beginning, the peaceful protests, because of wrong I felt was done. The looting and all of that, I'm not for that. But I think that it brought awareness to the police officers and the relationship that the community and the police officers have. I think that the New York situation, the Eric Garner situation, I just think that it's just, if I had been in that situation and I heard him, I can't breathe, you know, and we've got him surrounded, that somebody with some sense, let's lighten up off of this guy and see what's going on. But you know, I just think that we've got to learn that all of us are human beings and we need to treat each other as we want to be treated.
Well, along those lines, Pastor, sometimes we hear the statement, this is not a black thing, it is a poor thing, meaning that it seems like poor people are being targeted more than just African Americans as a whole. What do y'all think about that? And both of you, if you would briefly address that.
Well, you know, and because poor people, we know poor people don't have, first of all, they're not educated, most of them not educated. And I don't mean school education, but education to know what's going on in the world, how to do this, how to do that, the process and stuff. And so if people don't know the process, they're not educated into the process and stuff, then you have an opportunity to take advantage of them.
Yes.
And I have to agree. In other words, sometimes, but now in reality, African Americans, it shows that sometimes they are treated worse than white Americans. You know, what's really amazing is you can have a poor white person that feel like that he's better than that black person that might be on the upper echelon and doing good in life. But it just because of the fact of the color of their skin, they feel like they're superior, that white folks sometimes feel like that they're superior, but that's not true. In other words, like Reverend Anderson said, we got to learn to get along and work together in order to make a difference in this world.
Yes. We have maybe a couple of minutes, and we've used our time wisely. I'm telling you, when it's going well and go quickly. But the Southern Baptist Association, which has not always had a good reputation, they have seen the necessity of beginning to focus on racial reconciliation, and they're going to have a leadership conference in the near future. What do you think about the Southern Baptist Association having this conference, and what do you think we ought to do locally?
Well, I think it's ludicrous that we are in the 21st century and now talking about integrating our churches.
Oh, Lord.
We haven't done it yet, you know, and the thing of it is, and then I think that we must learn to make people feel welcome, whatever color of their skin is when they come to our churches, and not only make them feel welcome as they get into the flow of the congregation, join, and we must make them be a part of the congregation. Let them use their gifts and their talents to take them wherever they belong, because we can do more than sing. And I think, and in my church, I mean, anyone is welcome. Anyone is welcome. That makes no difference the color of their skin. Anyone is welcome. And I think that's the way it ought to be in God's house anyway. You know, 11 o'clock hour on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in the United States.
My.
That has to change. You know, if the people can't get along, church people can't get along, then how do we expect the rest of the world to get along?
And the NAACP acronym stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. When African Americans and white Americans got together to form this organization at its root stage, the word colored was used so that it would encompass all people.
Go ahead, girl.
So I don't want to preach, but you know I will. But I want to say that, and I know this mirrors many things you've said as long as you've been president, and you've been a wonderful one, and that is that everybody, including their children, ought to join the NAACP. What you say about that, Mr. Cleary?
Amen, girl. Like you, that's right. I agree.
Amen. We are so grateful. We are just so grateful. And I'm going to say this as a private citizen. I'm grateful to God. Then as chairperson of Paducah Human Rights Commission, I'm grateful that you are on this show today. And thank you so much. And we'd like to have you back a little bit later in the year to follow up on a special event that we're going to have in the next 2.5 months to come.
Sounds good.
I'm glad that you invited us, and
Yes.
hopefully that at some point in time we can all get together and make a difference.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And we'll be back very shortly for our third segment. And welcome back to PHRC Raising the Standard, our third segment for our 1-hour show today. We're so grateful. We've had great guests, and now we have one more great guest. And if you would, Commissioner Leslie Page is going to introduce her. She's going to tell us a little bit about herself, and we're going to go into some very important things about mental health.
So today we're happy to have Dr. Jody Giles, and she's a licensed professional counselor from Keble, Kentucky. Thank you, Jody. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what you do?
Thank you for having me. I am a licensed professional counselor, clinical counselor in Kentucky. I'm also an educational psychologist and an assistant professor with Lindsey Wilson College's School of Professional Counseling. I'm the resident faculty supervisor for our program here in Paducah, and we train people to become mental health clinicians and become professional counselors in our area.
Well, I'm just going to start off with some questions about what this show is about, which is, your part of it will be more about racism, prejudice, where those kinds of things come from. So, and part of your answers will probably come from just your years of working with people and some from your educational background. But where do you think racism, or any prejudice for that matter, where does it originate?
Well, we think about racism as being a set of negative attitudes toward a particular group or classification of people, and based on the color of their skin or particular qualities that they have. And one of the things that we think about in terms of racism and where does this begin is that as human beings, part of our cognitive development is that we want to categorize and classify, and that's in our nature. That's part of what we do. It's only through training, observational learning, teaching, watching others, images in the media, and learned behavior that we start to attribute negative qualities to individuals based on ethnicity, color of skin, or being other than us in some way.
I'm glad you mentioned that part about like cognitively, like that's what we do. And this is going to be kind of funny, but it made me think of that old, on Saturday Night Live, there was a skit they would do, Pat. Who's that? It's Pat. And it was someone who was very ambiguous. You couldn't tell if Pat was male or female. And so, and we do have that need to, it's cognitive efficiency. We want to know, because depending on what someone is or how we categorize them might affect how we respond to them. So it doesn't necessarily come from a bad place, but based on, like you said, you referenced the media and things of that nature, we can make it a bad thing when we do that, and definitely when we start to stereotype.
Well, just to make sure that we don't lose anybody in the terminology, how do you define cognitive, and what are the little fingers that kind of extend from that word based on your response a moment ago?
When we think of cognitive development, we think of from the beginnings of life, we have a thinking mind, and we try to assemble ideas and images, perceptions, sensations into some organized way of understanding the world and our place in the world. And so cognition really just refers to thinking. And within that, the way we think is influenced by our attitudes, our belief systems, and our value systems. And if those value systems are consistent with racist ideology, with bigotry, and with ostracizing others that are different than us, then that becomes a real problem.
Well, in lieu of that, cognition then technically would begin at about what age or what stage of life?
We think of cognition from the beginning of life. The very beginnings of life, we enter what we call a sensory stage, where it's all about just your sensations and perceptions, eating, drinking, being nurtured, being cared for. And that is extremely critical for the development of every human being. And we know that there are issues from the beginning with people who do not receive the same level of care and nurture, and that can cause problems later. But we think about, we begin with our sensory organs, our taste, touch, sight, smell, and then we move forward into exploring our world, and we learn to walk, and we learn to talk, and language becomes extraordinarily important. And so the idea of cognition and language is extremely important, how we talk to ourselves and how others talk to us. It helps us understand our world and where we fit into the world.
Right. Commissioner?
So if during that period of critical development, those first few years, or maybe later on into to adolescence, if a child is brought up in a family whose values do include, having a prejudiced attitude toward a certain group, and they go off to college for the first time and they find out, well, the world is not exactly like, what it's like at my house.
Yes.
And they realize that their views may not mesh and may not be helping them. Or maybe they're just sad about the way they've been taught to view people. How do they go about changing that?
Well, in counseling, we talk about a term called cultural encapsulation, and that is just stems from this idea that when we have a restricted experience of the world, then we expect other people to experience the world the same way we do. And so we have to learn to take on multiple perspectives. And that's an important part of growing up. It's an important part of becoming a citizen of the world and of other cultures besides our own specific microculture, if you want to call it that. We talk to our students in counseling about creating their own set of questions of, how did I ever come to know something was true? And so when you think about, how did I know that this particular group was different than me, and then how did I know that they weren't as good as me? An example of a group situation like that might be a stereotype that women are bad drivers or are worse drivers than men. And so we tend
That one's true, isn't it?
we tend to laugh about that. But when you really stop and question that and ask yourself, how did I come to know that? You come to know things by being told things, by observing things. Perhaps you have an experience with a driver that happened to be female, and she was a bad driver. Or perhaps for yourself, if you're a woman, you may have had an accident, and because of these stereotypes, you attribute that to your own defect in you, which leads you to doubt your ability. Back to your question about how do we challenge then students as they go to college, how do we challenge individuals as they go out into a larger world, we ask them to question themselves constantly about how did they come to know anything was true, and then to hold on to the things that matter and are part of the value system that they want to keep, and then how to let go of the things that don't work for them anymore.
What about that self-fulfilling prophecy, that whole concept about that? It's been thrown around for a long time, and most people don't even understand what it means, otherwise they wouldn't throw it around so loosely. But from a professional aspect, from the mental health aspect, if you would, talk about self-fulfilling prophecy and how powerful it is for people of color, specifically African Americans, and women, and maybe even children.
Okay. Self-fulfilling prophecy is a very simple idea, and that is that if you have an expectation about the behavior or beliefs of another person and how they're going to treat you, you unintentionally behave in ways that create that very scenario where they do treat you that way. One of the questions that has come up is in terms of driving and being pulled over, and African Americans being pulled over in larger numbers, and those issues. Those are real issues. And one of the things that happens is there's an expectation, a self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes that a black person may have, that an officer is going to treat them more aggressively or more negatively than they would a Caucasian person or a white person. And then unintentionally, they demonstrate some behaviors that leads an officer to behave in exactly those negative ways. It can also go the other direction. An officer can expect an African American person or another person of color to behave in certain ways that are stereotyped ways, but they have an idea that they're going to encounter resistance or they're going to encounter hostility. And they unintentionally, the officer may set up a scenario or behave in ways that actually sort of exacerbate that or incite that in that individual. And so it's a very destructive process legally. Now, in terms of education, there was a landmark video and experiment done after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And many people have seen this. A teacher in Iowa, Jane Elliott, did a famous experiment called the Blue Eyes and Brown Eyes experiment, and it's called the Class Divided. And what she did was she took a group of third graders, and all white, and had them take on the perspective of a person who got less than or was treated differently just because of the color of their eyes. And the children got to take on the perspective of how it felt to be discriminated against, but also the perspective of what it felt like and how bad they felt about being the discriminator. And so that being able to take on that perspective and being able to have that experience is really powerful for children and adults.
Yes. When it comes to children, of course, bullying is just a more modern approach word, I think, that we've picked up from the day and brought it back to the present, is really just abuse. And it's also often associated with young people. But the truth is, bullying doesn't begin with young people. Bullying begins with adults, and is manifested through our youth in different venues of our world today. Households, I think you may have alluded to that. Certainly our guest in previous two segments alluded to the importance of education and begin at a very young age. And so I somehow believe that adults push their spirit of self-fulfilling prophecy onto young people. And it's not all by accident, some of it's by design. If you would address how adults actually design pushing their mores and beliefs, negative or otherwise, onto the young people.
Well, when adults want children to be like them, okay, so if you're talking about within a family, most parents would like for their children to have the same set of beliefs and the same value system that they do. So they may overtly reject any differences of opinions. They may take on a very authoritarian perspective and not allow children to think outside of a box or outside of that one dimension. Questioning is shut down frequently. They aren't allowed to question how their parents or why their parents believe this is true. People use symbols. Symbolism is important. So one of the things that we talk about is this sort of subtle racism and this sort of subtle socialization that occurs where the in-group or the group the child is trying to conform to, the group they need to be a part of to survive and live, whether that's white or black or Mexican American or any other group of color, that those children then tend to feel that they are required to believe that. And the parents may not overtly say, don't like this group because they're black, don't like these people because they behave that way, but they may instead use symbolism or even subtle social cues of disapproval or ways of ignoring that part of the culture. For example, parents may only watch certain television shows where only their dominant social group is involved. They may not allow other types of music in their home than just what they allow. And so allowing children and young adults to explore other cultures and cultural and ethnic identities is really critical to letting them create a more comprehensive and inclusive worldview. And that is the only way that we can really change attitudes at any level, because then they maybe will be different with their children and allow them to do things they didn't get to do and be exposed to other things.
Well, you know, we've just had a great time with you, Doctor, and we're going to have to wind down a little bit. But if you could, very briefly address the whole aspect of PTSD.
Well, one of the questions I think that comes up is PTSD a real thing? It is a real thing. It's a very severe and debilitating illness that is oftentimes associated with severe stress, trauma, or implied stress and trauma. There can be a continuum of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. So the threat of violence or the fear of losing your life or being harmed can have psychological consequences even if you weren't actually harmed. So the victim of a mugging would have some level of could have PTSD. One of the things that happens is that we know, and there's research emerging that says that police officers themselves or law enforcement, people who are close to the front lines, in other words, also have a level of post-traumatic stress disorder when they're involved in violent encounters.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is that they continue to work and they continue to try to function without realizing that they may need assistance and mental health services. Police officers, mental health professionals, disaster relief workers, those people also need the kind of debriefing and treatment that people who consider themselves to have been the victims of a crime need. The very circumstances that police officers and emergency responders find themselves in often are triggers for the symptomology of PTSD, and then that can exacerbate or make worse the potential for violence or for things to get out of control quickly.
Well, Doctor, we appreciate you so much, and we know that you have blessed some lives today. And we want to thank everybody for staying with us. And we're going to have to close this segment right here, but Commissioner Page and I are going to be back, and we're going to talk a little bit about an event that we are hosting in the next couple of months or so. And Dr. Giles is going to be a member of that panel. So stay with us. Stay with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment of this very special edition of PHRC Raising the Standard. So we're going to wrap up today, and I think it has been a fantastic hour.
I agree. And I want to thank you because you coordinated this show. And so if I had a medal to give you, I'd give it to you right now. We are so happy that Paducah Police Chief Brandon Barnhill, McCracken County Sheriff John Hayden, President of the Community Clergy, Reverend Alfred Anderson, President of our local NAACP, Mr. J.W. Cleary, and Dr. Jody Giles. And I tell you what, talk about some stellar guests and topics, relevancy. And just in case somebody's just tuning in, this show is all about issues that are happening within law enforcement near and far. Some relevant, some not, but it's all important that we have to be aware of what's going on around us, and involving the faith community and of course the NAACP, and then looking at the mental health issue of racism and prejudice and how all of that works together in the citizenry. With youth and adults, even small children, because as Dr. Giles was talking about the cognition aspect, how important and powerful the mind is and the influence on the minds of people that result in becoming lifestyles for a number of people. And as a licensed psychologist, and you are a professor here at WKCTC, I know this is close to your heart, and so what would you like to do about the comments so far about our wrap-up?
Well, I'm so excited. I'm so excited that when I approached each of these guests and each of the panelists that will be part of the event we're about to talk to you about, I'm so excited that they were all willing, not just willing, but they wanted to be part of it. They wanted to talk about these issues that we need to talk about as a community and as a country. And that has not always been the case. You know, there have been people that say, when we tell them about this event, we know that's kind of controversial. You might step on some toes. You might offend some people. Good.
Good.
I hope that we do, because that's what starts the dialogue. That's what gets people to talking. Where do these ideas come from? You know, are our minds and the things that we think, are they affecting our behaviors, and are our thoughts making us treat people unfairly? You know?
And how many people go along to get along? It's kind of like the shark frenzy, is as soon as one shark smells blood, all the sharks show up. And then the next thing, the frenzy is going on, and the frenzy is so powerful that often the sharks begin to attack each other. And before you know it, they're all wounded, they're all bleeding, they're actually eating the flesh of each other. And it becomes ugly, it becomes nasty, and all the people in the frenzy have blood on their hands. And so it's real important that the Paducah Human Rights Commission, the faith community, the NAACP, our city and county law enforcement, our mental health community, and our educational venues, it's so important that we all recognize that we all have a responsibility. Responsibilities are not all equal, but we all have responsibilities, do our part in helping to give hope and to help heal. Well, on May the 21st, at the Robert Cherry Civic Center, doors open at 5:30. The event will go from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And the name of the event is An Evening of Discussion, Justice for All. The premise for this event is not only the things that have happened in Ferguson and New York and Florida and other places across the free world, but things that are going on in the world that's not so free. And we want to make sure that we want to support the law enforcement in that. It's important for us to be proactive, but don't be like the ostrich that sticks his head in the sand. We need to be smart. We need to be observant, we need to be focused, and we need to be vigilant about what's going on. And we want to do our part as parents and grandparents and legal caregivers and other professionals. We really do need to face and focus on all of the things that happen. Because again, people who don't mean well may be the sharks that create the frenzy. And so all of us who do mean well, we need to make sure we step up, we are courageous, we are bold, and in my case, as a woman of the gospel, not only as chair of PHRC, but I'm God confident. And I don't put my faith on the shelf just because I get up and leave the house in the morning. And so we have to come together, and this event is a coming together of people from all walks of life, professionals, and we're going to be asking and answering tough questions and sharing comments and information on tough topics on that night.
You left out the most important part.
Tell me.
The food.
The food. Okay. We are having dinner catered by who?
Artisan Kitchen.
Yes, we are. And we're having a sweet lady named Rosia Keeling, who is going to help us with the decor. We will have entertainment. We have some confirmed entertainers who will be there, probably about 5 to 6. And we're going to talk about the panelists, because Commissioner Page coordinated this show, and she also coordinated the panelists. As a board, we decided on the people we wanted to ask, the walks of life we wanted to make sure were represented, but she coordinated getting all those panelists. So tell us about that.
We've got some real movers and shakers coming to participate in this event. We've got a federal judge, state representative, police chief, sheriff, several attorneys, people from the mental health field, social workers, counselors, psychologists. Am I leaving anybody out?
The faith community.
Oh, the faith, sorry.
Yes.
The faith community.
Yes.
2 different pastors are coming to be part of this event.
And our own president of the NAACP is going to be on the panel. I'm so excited. I'm trying to stay in my seat, because if we don't stay in our seat, we'll get in trouble with Tom Butler and Dan Shepard here at the television department of WKCT in the award-winning Paducah, Kentucky. We are going to just have fun. And here's the deal. We don't believe in being Rottweilers, sitting around waiting for a fight or to hear about a fight and jump into a fight. We are here to be peacemakers. We're here to be informers in how to handle complaints, how to handle ourselves when we believe we've been discriminated against. We encourage people to go to our website, and you'll find out more than you may ever need to know. Our mission, you'll see pictures and bios of our board members. We have a student intern program, and we do other events, and we collaborate and we co-sponsor and sponsor other events in the community, because we are not a separate entity. We are an entity within an entity. And so we just simply want to do our part to help you and to help our community, to help our leaders, and in the process we grow. We grow in every aspect. We improve our lifestyle, we improve our citizenry, and we can help young people to grow into better citizens. And I tell you what, they need it. They need it because they can't do it by themselves, and they can't do it on their own. What do you want to say about the rest of that event before we have to close out this last segment?
It's free.
It is free. And thank you. Please bring your children, educators, bring your students, pastors, bring your congregants, and other folk. Bring the people that you know can be positively impacted. We are not going to beat up on anybody. We're not going to let anybody beat up on you or beat up on us. This is going to be a collective effort, and you want to be a part of it. This is epic. This is historical. Be there, and as they used to say, or be square. We thank you, don't we?
Thank you.